an ETF is that they are either index-based or factor-based. And this is one of the things people forget about. ETFs are not actively managed inside the ETF, period, end of story. And the reason why they're not actively managed is because what happens is an ETF, since it's publicly traded, so it trades all day, throughout the day, it's trading right now. See, a mutual fund trades once a day at the end of the day, and that's after the markets are closed. In an ETF, they're trading all day. Because they're trading all day, the SEC, FINRA, whoever put it together says that if you are a money manager and you are the money manager of an ETF, you are required to show your holdings within 24 hours of any buy or sell because it's an actively traded investment. Well, think about how nuts this is. There's a reason why Richie Freeman doesn't want to have an ETF of his thing. There's a reason why Invesco's Equity Income doesn't want to have an ETF of their thing. There's a lot of reasons why. And one of the major reasons is because if you're making changes in a mutual fund, the client, the rep, the world does not see that change until the end of the quarter. Whereas in an ETF, 24 hours, now you've got one of two problems. The first problem is that you go, oh, all right, well, in order for me to work this ETF, I'm gonna have to go buy all of my Apple stock all at once, or all of my Google or Nvidia, pick a stock. And the moment I buy that stock and I buy $1 billion of it because I'm a hot fund, immediately the stock price goes up 10%. Well, that's not good because I moved that 10% because of my purchase. You never, as a money manager, want to move your own stock. You want other people to move it. Because if you move it, somebody's going to sell into you, and now you're starting at a loss. And this game is too hard at the beginning to have a loss to start. The other way they can do is say, well, I'll just ease in like a mutual fund. You know, I'll buy 50 million today, 50 million tomorrow. A week from now, I'll buy another 50 million. The problem with that is you're exposed in the ETF to show that $50 million purchase. So if you start seeing a money manager buy 50 million day after day after day, and you're a smart broker, you know, at a Merrill or Morgan or Goldman Sachs, or you're just a portfolio guy or a hedge fund trying to pick off some returns, they will destroy you because they'll front run you and run that stock up knowing you're going to continue to keep buying it. So it's really, really tricky when you have an ETF because that's the reason, and that's the struggle the money managers have. Almost all ETFs are either index-based or factor-based. So index is simple, the S&P 500, the QQQs, whatever. The factor-based is formula-based. So let's say, for example, we've got Jack Simon and we've got Steve Everett. And so J and S are our two favorite letters, J for Jack and S for Steve. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start an ETF, and it's called the J and S ETF. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the S&P 500 and pick all the stocks that start with the letter J and all the stocks that start with the letter S. Now, that sounds like a foolish ETF, but you know what? That would be a factor-based ETF. A more realistic example would be give me all the stocks in the S&P 500 that generate more than 4% per year in a dividend. And what we're going to do is we'll update it every 6 months and then change to the new names. And that's how most of the ETFs are run. They're run as factor-based ETFs. So again, that's the positive and negatives. The SMAs are broad diversification and active management. They also have low expenses because, again, the average SMA is about 0.25 to 0.3% if you look at us, Dana, and RNC. And those things are really good, and especially the fact they're the most tax efficient. There's no maybes about that. Not only do you own your own cost basis, but you have the ability, if it's a big enough account at the end of the year, to have the home office at Primerica sell losers to offset winners or sell winners to offset losers. So they can help the client not have to pay taxes at the end of the year. And that's not something you can do in a mutual fund or an ETF, because at the end of the year, I can't crack open a mutual fund or an ETF and say, hey, can you pull out the 12 losers from that fund? Because I need an offset against the winners. They'd laugh at you. But you see, you own your own mutual fund. You own your own personal mutual fund in an SMA. And what's great is, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, as long as you don't get stupid, you don't have to worry, Mr. and Mrs. Klein, about other stupid people affecting your performance. The one negative is statement shock. And in statement shock, what I mean is you have to be aware that there's going to be a ton of stocks. So where some clients got 3 or 4 lines on a statement, now they might have 8 to 10 pages of a statement. And you just have to be aware of that. And that's how it has to be explained to the client. The amazing thing about SMAs, let's assume that your client, you decide how you're going to invest your client. And the client comes first. Always, always, always comes first. But let's assume that you can do it in any of these 3 different ways, and that's why they offer them. Let's assume that's the case. If a mutual fund was 0.7% a year in an expense ratio, and an ETF was 0.4% in an expense ratio, and the SMA was 0.3, assuming that the client was taken care of with the right answers and you chose SMAs, do you realize that you could charge anywhere from 0.1 to 0.4% more than maybe you would normally charge because the expenses on that investment are so cheap? Once the client's taken care of, why shouldn't you be able to take care of you and your family? It's either going to go to the money manager on a mutual fund, or it's going to go to the Everetts and Nelson, home office. I don't know. To me, it's not that hard a decision to make. And that's why SMAs are one of the most popular things that people use in managed account throughout the industry, not just Primerica. And so I really, really love that. So I just wanted to make sure that we had kind of a broad understanding of that before I dive into a couple last things on the funds and stuff. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I would just say, obviously, I would say the disadvantage of an SMA, you said broad diversification, but in our current platform, it's like, okay, you have like 2 SMAs or 3 SMAs. Obviously, you won't get as much diversification as you would in a mutual fund based upon the number of stocks that a mutual fund will buy versus the SMA.
Depends, you're right. But if I have, again, I'm only going to use Primerica. Their average is a $150,000 trade. So again, I'm going to use an average, not at $1 million, it's a different story. But if I take the average of 150, I think it's 160 is the current average. 160, if I have 55 stocks in 3 different ones, let's say I chose a Dana, a dividend strategy, and a large value, and I get 160 stocks, I'm only carrying $1,000 in risk on average per stock. Now, granted, some have more percentage, some have less, but even if I'm carrying 3,000 or 4,000, I would still say 160 stocks is pretty good diversification. I'm not saying it's 800 stocks like a mutual fund or an ETF or 1,000 stocks, but you also have to be aware that there was a study done, Steve. I don't know if I ever told you about this. This was 15 years ago, and they said if you own more than 451 stocks, you basically own an overpriced index. And they actually ran an actual analysis of this. It was way too deep for me to read deep into, but I did read the cursory stuff, and I was like, that's factual. 451 was the magic number. So, but that's what I'm saying. So yeah, so I'm not saying it's not huge diversification. You're going to get broader from mutual funds, ETFs, but I would say it's certainly at 160 stocks is broad enough. But that's just my opinion. So the last thing that I wanted to hit with you on is this. I created an Excel spreadsheet. And I had done this about 7 years ago, right down the road with somebody Steve, Dave and Betsy Fagan. And they had asked me to do this when they first started using Legg Mason in 2014. And so then Steve asked me yesterday. And so while I was watching the NCAA tournament, I decided to put this together just so you could kind of have an understanding. And I kind of sent it off to him because I somehow I don't know how to fix between mid and small. I took away the black line that I put on 7-8 years ago, and I can't figure out how to put it back on to separate mid and small. So maybe Steve, somebody knows technology. But what I noticed was that there is a lot of different choices that you now have between Franklin and Legg from which to choose from. And look, I could spend 4 hours telling you stories on all of these different funds. But I want to hit the one that I think is critical to managed accounts, and it's critical to mutual funds. And I think you have to use it regardless of which one you consider, and see if I'm crazy or not. All right. So I'm going to spend time on the Franklin Income Fund, which is a large value, and you'll notice it there in the large value box. about almost 2/3 of the way down. The reason why I like this story, and we haven't spent enough time talking about it, and I don't know why the old wholesalers, if you ever saw them from Franklin, why they didn't tell clients this and reps, because it's by far the coolest story that Franklin has. The fund goes back to 1948. It has never, to the best of my knowledge, paid a dividend yield less than 3.99%, which happened late last year. I mean, this thing was paying 5s, 6s, and 7s forever and ever and ever. And as of right now, I want to start by teasing you here, and then I'll tell you how we back into this number. Do you know that the dividend yield gross on this fund is 5.5%? If you take the expense ratio off at 0.7 something, you're at 4.75% right now in terms of an income stream to your client. We're talking about 0.4% every month getting paid to your client. Now, look, here's the biggest problem that anybody will tell you from Lifetime. If you were to take the 3 different stages of somebody's savings, you have the accumulation phase, the preservation phase, and the distribution phase. If you have those 3, the hardest one on Lifetime platform to work with is the distribution phase. The other 2 are a heck of a lot easier than the distribution phase. I'm not saying it's impossible. It certainly is harder. And there's no real income stream built portfolios. The only thing you really have is you have the, the multi-asset income from Sage. I mean, everybody seems to use that at 2080 because that's all that's available, and you're trying to hide the bonds that are a disaster. Because we knew at some point interest rates were going to go up and bond prices were going to go down. Even if they don't go up a lot, they're going to go, the interest rates are going to go up some. So the Franklin Income Fund, it takes this 5.5% yield right now currently, pays you out, the client, almost 4.8. Here's how they get to this. They have a portfolio they put together. It can be anywhere from 30% stocks and 70% bonds, and you can go the other way. They can go 70-30. So 30-70, 70-30 is your build. They're currently at 70-30, 70% stocks and 30% bonds. Now, what I'm going to do in the next part here is I'm going to lay you out the 3 different categories that get you to 100% of this portfolio. So the first 50% out of the 100 is in dividend-paying stocks. So if you're writing down notes, 50% dividend-paying stocks. Let's assume the average dividend is about 3% on that portfolio. So we're going to take a weighted average, and a weighted average is multiplying the percentage times the interest or dividend rate. So 50% or half of a 3% dividend, that portfolio is going to get you 1.5. So 50% times 3% dividend yield equals 1.5. The next 30% is in bonds. And let's assume that 30% in bonds, let's say it's yielding a little over 3%. They have a fair amount of high yield in there, which has certainly held up very well because they don't do as bad when interest rates rise. So a third of 30%, a third of 30% is a third almost. A third of 3% is going to get you 1% in that weighted average. So now I'm 80% of the portfolio in, and I've only gotten to 2.5%. I have to get to 5.5 in the remaining 20%. How on God's green earth are you going to get to that? The last 20% is in what they call equity-linked notes. They're just basically the same brand of what they call covered calls. So for those of you who took your managed account license, good old Series 65, I'm bringing back those ugly thoughts here, so I apologize ahead of time. But that here's what it does, though. Those covered calls that they're writing. So let me give you a simple example of this. So Franklin Income buys Primerica stock. And if you're taking notes on this thing here, it's easier to see this. But if you have Primerica stock, we're going to buy it. Franklin Income is going to buy it at $100 a share. We are going to give Charlie Nelson the opportunity to buy Primerica stock at $120 1 year from today. So he's got the option or the right to buy that stock. In exchange for that right, where he hasn't had to put up any cost for those shares, in order for him to buy that, he's going to pay a premium to Franklin Income Fund. He's going to pay, in this case, $5. That $5 of premium, which is 5%, we're going to get on the stock because it's $100 a share. That $5 in premium is going into the income bucket and it's paying your clients in retirement. Think about this. They're going to collect money from a stock, this huge income stream, not from a bond. That's what's amazing about this. Now, one of three things is going to happen to Charlie Nelson and us. So I'm Franklin Income Money Manager. Charlie Nelson buys this from me. A year from now, if the stock goes from 100 to 150, Charlie Nelson is a very happy camper, and Mark Everswick is not very happy. Because I'm going to have to give him that stock at 120, even though it went to 150 Primerica. I'm going to give it to him at 120, and he's going to make $30 a share, less the $5 that he gave us in premium. Now, we still did okay. I made 20% on that stock, plus I got $5. So I still made 25% on the stock, but man, I didn't go up to 150. I didn't make 50% on it. So in a rising tide market where the market goes up 30% plus, Franklin Income always underperforms because they have those covered calls. They rarely ever outperform. But that's okay. So then the markets, let's say the prime market goes to only 110. The stock market's kind of in that single digit category, like it'll probably be this year. That's what my prediction is. So maybe, maybe the prime market goes up to 110. Oh, I love that. Because now I get to keep the prime market stock at 110 because Charlie doesn't want it at 120, never got there. So he's like, I'm not going to lose money, so I'm just going to throw it away. And I get to keep Charlie's premium. So not only did I make 10%, but I also made 5 on the premium. I made 15% on that stock when everybody else only made 10. Gosh, I look pretty smart. The third one is that the stock goes down to 90. And if prime market stock goes down to 90, I'm going to lose 10% on it, but I'm going to get to keep Charlie's $5 premium. So I only really lost 5% on that stock. So here's how this thing works. In straight up years, it way underperforms. In the middle of the road years, it absolutely kills it versus any competitor. I mean, kills it. And then in the straight down markets, like in 2008, the fund went down 26. Now the S&P went down 36, but the fund still went down 26. So you have to be aware that the markets are, if the market goes down, this is going to go down. But again, you kind of go back to that line we use with municipal bonds. When you're a rental property manager, do you care about the rent? Do you care about the house going up and down? Or do you care about the rents that come in? And I'll be honest with you, most clients, if they can keep seeing that income stream at 4.5%, 5%, and it keeps paying that out, I don't think they care near as much about how that works. By the way, Franklin Income, that next year in 2009, after the 2008 drop, came back and you were ahead after those 2 years. Not every fund can say that. Some took 4 to 5 years. I even had funds that took 4 to 5. This did not. This actually came back within 1 year. So to me, that Franklin Income Fund, you may want to consider using mutual funds and the SMAs to generate an income stream. If you're using just mutual funds, it's an unbelievable income stream driver. But you're getting the income stream. And this is the coolest part. You're getting the income stream mostly in that portfolio from not bonds. And that to me is, in this environment, that's a really, really exciting feature that I don't have to worry about the bonds getting destroyed to get some income. Oh, you're on mute.
This is not being offered on the Magic Account side, though. This is just the retail side.
And the only reason it can't be is because Primerica can't handle the options in their current SMA setup. No. So if you guys go to InvestNet in 2024, it's tops on our list to ask for a recommendation to be put on the platform.
What does that mean if we go to InvestNet in 2024?
Well, what it means is your back office platform right now is at one Primerica way. So like in the separately managed accounts, I don't know if you know the backstory on how they work, but when you all send in a trade for $100,000 and it goes into dividend strategy, the money managers send down to Primerica every morning the list of stocks that Primerica is going to buy. And they're going to buy 3% of Apple and 4% of Microsoft and 3%, and they're going to make those purchases. Those purchases are actually made at one Primerica way. They aren't shipped off to TD or anything else. They're made at your home office. The problem is that the way it was built through Tracy, and I think part of it was the fact that Primerica probably didn't give her enough money to work with. That's my guess. She had to basically put stuff together like MacGyver with a rubber band, some glue, and 3 pieces of tape. And that's what, and I'm sure that's exactly what happened, even though I'm guessing. And so now, unfortunately, I asked that question because I was working with, actually Steve knows him, Kenny Engelmeyer. Kenny Engel was working on a $7 million trade about a month ago, and I think he's still working on it. But that $7 million, the problem was that I had asked about fractional shares and a couple other questions just on this trade. And Jordan Brown got back to me and said, it's impossible with the current platform to do fractional shares. It's impossible to do options. It's impossible to do anything that's not just basically straight stock picking. If you don't have full shares and you don't have full stock, you can't. Because remember, there's 20% in options. You would have covered calls and stuff, and you'd have to list that on the portfolio. And Primerica's back office cannot do anything beyond just straight stock buying and whole shares. Those are the 2 things. So unfortunately, we have to wait until InvestNet has those capabilities. Then we can do fractional shares. We can do it because Franklin Income has, for the last 3 years, had an SMA, and it is on InvestNet's platform because we use InvestNet with other firms. So it's a coming.
All right.
Does that help, Charlie?
It does, because I had no idea what you were talking about. Is that InvestNet the same thing that's below our Morningstar on the investment page?
InvestNet will be your InvestNet will be able to do trading as well as all the back office operations. In other words, you'll leave TD Ameritrade here in the next 2 years and you'll find something else. But InvestNet will have a heck of a lot more capabilities than what you guys currently have.
All right, Mark, do you have anything more you want to go through? We're kind of winding down here, and I know, Snow, that you'll be back in here for face-to-face training back on May 19th. And I'm not sure if you have an agenda already set for that, for the training during the day, but obviously what we didn't go into is this is a pretty, I guess, overwhelming list of options. It's a great list of options with Franklin Templeton and Clearbridge, but it's an overwhelming option. And so either one of 2 things happen when there's overwhelming options. 1, you do what you've always done with the funds you've always done it with, or 2, you don't do anything at all, right? So I guess I'm hoping whether it be that next training, maybe you have something better because to train on, but maybe going through and say, hey, we've got in the large cap value category, you just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 options in the large cap value category. Maybe highlight 1 or 2 that make sense for us to continue to look at. 1 or 2 in a large cap growth, 1 or 2 in the et cetera. Not necessarily right now, but maybe we can have a little bit better insight as to what we should really be paying attention to outside of the Clearbridge funds, you might say.
Sure. No, I completely agree with that. So no, I'm more than happy to do that there, and maybe we'll just use that as a boilerplate. So we'll start with this, and then maybe I'll end with 1 or 2 value adds, but particularly talking about maybe we can spend a little time on the solo 401k, and then a new concept called donor advised funds, which has just gotten approved in the last year that I think a lot of people might be interested in.
Yeah. Absolutely. So does anybody else have any questions for Mark before we let him go? Jack, can you say hi to make sure you're really out there?
Hi, Steve.
And that's May 19th, right? That's the May 19th in person, followed by your open house that night later on.
That's right. Absolutely. All right, guys. Hey, we appreciate you popping by, and I know I've always find this very, very, very valuable. So if you have any questions, you got Mark's number. Mark, thank you again for everything.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark.